I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have our guest today is Lynn, and Lynn, I'll let you decide if you want to say what part of the country you're in or not. Tom, Brian, how you fellas doing?
Good.
Very good, thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm currently in North Carolina.
Okay, well let's just go ahead and tell us what you've experienced, and then we'll go from there.
Alrighty. Well, it was back in 1975. The month was January. I know it was a Friday night because I had a friend spend the night, and we had begged her mother. We said, please let her spend the night, and she went back and forth with it. And she's like, all right, if you girls promise, you'll be home because I have to be at work Saturday morning. And we were like, no problem. So we set the alarm for 5 a.m. And, we stayed home and we just hung out and did what girls do. And when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., I was sleeping on the side by the window. And the house I lived in, the address in Vandalia, Illinois, was 405 North 5th Street. And if you were to Google that house, and if you look at the front steps to the right of the front door, that window there was my bedroom window. So I was completely dressed, and she was getting close to being done dressed. And I walked over, and I thought, hey, it's supposed to snow today. And I was, we were kids, 14 years old. The best thing to do is have snow. And we grew up in a town where, we knew everyone in town. We had certain spots to go to, where we all would meet up, and we would, go sledding for the day. So I was excited if it was going to snow. And plus, I had to walk my friend. I always walked her out the side door, go through the alley, halfway home. That's just what we did. And so I got up and I went over and I looked out the window, and I had real heavy drapes. And so I cracked open the drapes, and they opened from the middle, and it had snowed, and it looked like quite a bit. And it was so light outside. I don't know if you know, like sometimes it would snow and it just looks almost like, pre-dawn daylight. And so I noticed right below my window, there was this huge black thing. And I'm sitting there staring at it, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that's a bear. And I was just getting ready to say to my friend, oh, there's a bear out here. We've never even heard of bears in that area. And as my dad being a single parent, I had played in every woods all over that town. We ran wild. We didn't play in our playground back in the 70s. In the 70s, the whole town was your playground. So, I was never warned, hey, there's bears, or, there was nothing that we feared. So I'm sitting there looking at this thing. It had squatted down, and it had its hands. Well, at first I didn't know it was hands. It was squatted down, and it had its head bent down like it was looking at the ground. And then as soon as I was just getting ready to say to her, explain, hey, come look at the bear, I noticed it had fingers, and it had huge hands. And very gently, it was moving the snow with both hands, like outward, like it was zeroing in on something that it was interested in. And I instantly, started to freak out. And I started, I guess, shaking. And, I was just so nervous. I was like, trying to sit there and think, what is this thing? And so then just about that time, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds went by. It must have noticed either, because we really weren't talking, but maybe, lightly talking. And, but I think because when I opened the curtains wider to get a better look at it, I think the bedroom light, it knew something. It completely stopped what it was doing. And when it stopped what it was doing, it kind of looked up. It was kind of like it couldn't extend its head like we can, but it slowly looked up a little bit. And as it was doing that, it was slowly standing up. And it rose. It was like slow motion. And when it stood up, I've got a death grip on those curtains. And I know I was saying, oh my God, it's a monster, it's a monster. And whatever I was saying terrified my friend, because out of my left peripheral vision, I could see her standing there, and I'm begging her with tears rolling down my eyes to come look at the monster. And I'm describing this to her. And I guess the description, or, we had been friends since we were kids. She's never seen me act like that. And we played through the middle of the night until we got caught. We would never come home. So we were never afraid of stuff. So I'm standing there looking at this thing, and I'm just like, I'm in shock. Its shoulders are like 4 feet wide. Its arms hung down. It was black, and its hair was maybe an inch long. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its head, you couldn't really see a neck. It was just like all muscle. And I didn't see any female parts or anything like that. And I didn't see its feet because it was in the snow. And I didn't see its ears. I don't remember seeing ears. If I did see ears, it did not register. And believe me, I looked at everything on this thing, because out that window, it was probably 2.5 feet from my window. So when it stood up, I'm 5'3". And so I'll tell you later how we kind of figure out how we knew it was about 7.5 feet tall, because I was eye to eye with this thing, face to face. And the only thing between that thing and me, a 14-year-old kid, is that window. And it just registered me that it's a monster. So I kept telling her, it's got red eyes, it's a monster, it's staring at me. And I kept going over and over what it looks like. I said, and it looks like it's hateful. And I kept telling her its face, it looks like leather, like a tan leather. And I said, I couldn't see any teeth, except it had like a snarl on its face, like if it was to growl at you like a dog would, but you wouldn't see the teeth. It had that type of expression, like, I don't know if I can cuss on here, but like it was PO'd at me. And I could not move. I have never been so, I guess I experienced, it was such a fright that you're frozen solid. And I just remember hanging on to those curtains, for dear life. And I was just crying, and not like, whimpering or anything, just silently crying, and just kept talking and talking and talking. And then I kept saying, Kathy, well, I probably shouldn't have said her name. I said, I can't. I said, it's a monster. It has red eyes. I said, please come look. And I just begged her. Well, I think it knew. I was, because my mouth is moving, it probably had enough, and it knew that I was talking to someone. And so that's when all of a sudden it picked up its right leg. Like if you're standing and you start to raise your right leg, you see your knee come up. It didn't move its arms. It just picked up that right leg. And when it did that, that's when I just totally, I thought, okay, and now it's coming in. It's going to kill us. It's made its move. For some reason, I was able to let go of those curtains, and I turned and I screamed, run. We have to hide. It's coming to kill us. So I'm running to the back of the house screaming. She's coming behind me. And I fully expect any minute we're going to die. And so we get into by the way, my dad worked nights. So the only one home was me, my brother, and my friend spending the night. My dad worked in Effingham, Illinois at World Color Press, third shift. And so I was the oldest of 5 kids, except my 3 little sisters that night were spending the night with some cousins. So it was just us 3 home. So I took off running to my dad's bedroom, and I'm screaming at my brother. I'm like, get up, get up. I said, there's a monster outside with red eyes. It's coming to kill us. Get up. We have to hide. And he, I kept shaking the bed. And when he finally wakes up, he's like, shut up. Quit trying to scare me. I'm telling on you. And I said, I'm not lying. I said, get up, it's coming. So he basically cussed me out, and he just stayed there. So my friend and I, we took off running. We hid in the closet. I don't know how long we were there, and all of a sudden, I'm in the closet, and I'm saying to her, why didn't you look? Why didn't you look? I said, I was begging you. And she just kept sitting there crying, shaking her head. And I said, and she said, you saw a Bigfoot. And, I had heard it called a Momo monster, like the Missouri Monster as kids, but who believed in that stuff? So anyway, I was like, Kathy, and I went over to it with her. I said, this is what it looked like over and over. I said, we're going to die. I said, be quiet. Let's just listen. I said, I think it's going to kill it. And so we just sat there in quiet. And my brother, I guess he went right back to sleep. And so next thing I know, we hear bang, bang, bang on the front door. Well, back in the 70s, we didn't lock our doors. There were so many kids in my family, that just wasn't something we did. Everybody was coming in, so it wasn't something we did, even with our dad being gone through the night, because I would either sneak out or something was going on, and, so we never locked the door. So the next thing we hear, I guess her mother had opened the door and screamed, for my friend. And so my friend goes, it's my mom. And so she took off. And I said, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I said, I was convinced they're going to be killed out there. And so she leaves, and I stay in the closet. And I'm in there, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, because I'm reliving everything that just happened. And I'm trying to think, what is it? What is it? And then I remembered, oh, my God, we were seconds, just seconds. We were completely dressed. If I had not looked out that window, that house, I don't know if you can see on the left side of the house, there's a side door. That's the door I always use, because all my friends, I would go back behind the alley. Everyone lived back in that area, and that's just how we traveled. Kids used alleys back then, shortcuts. So we were within seconds of going out that side door. And if we had, I wouldn't have seen that thing, because it was around the corner below my bedroom window. I know it would have known we were there. And to this day, every time I think about it, I just kind of block it out. I believe the way how evil and how hateful it looked at me, I believe it's one of the bad ones. And I've had 44 years to really, never go in the woods and research it. But, I would read a lot and talk to people. I believe that was a wicked one, and I would have been dead. I could have just I know it would have followed us, or because those back alleys, they were small and there was lots of outbuildings, and it's woodsy. Even though it was winter, you still had your thick, bushes around. I kept thinking, I would have been dead. I would have disappeared. They would have thought I was either kidnapped or I was a runaway, because honestly, as kids, we were kind of wild. We had, our dad's gone through the night, and we're like, okay, dad's gone to work. We all just kind of scattered and went our own way and played outside. And then everybody would say, well, why didn't you guys call the cops? We didn't have a phone, because my brother, who wouldn't get out of bed, him and his friend, about a month before that, were calling the local pizza place, ordering pizzas, and watching them being delivered to different people's houses, laughing. And these people didn't even laugh at them. So they got caught, and my dad disconnected the phone. And then before that, my little youngest sister would get on there and just call whoever, hit numbers, and we'd catch her talking to who knows who, running up the phone bill. So we had no phone. We were completely isolated and, trapped. And so later on that day, I forgot. So my dad comes home. It's about 7:30 in the morning, and I'm still in that closet. And my dad comes home, and I hear my big mouth brother. He runs out there, and he tells on me. And he says, I was in there lying. I was trying to scare him. I'm claiming I saw a monster with red eyes. So my dad knew that I was always picking on my brother. I've locked him in the attic. I've locked him in the basement. I've done a lot of things to him. It was fun. So anyway, my dad came back there, and he poked his head in the closet. He's like, what are you doing? And that's when all the flood of tears came back. I said, Dad, I swear on a stack of Bibles, it's true. So I tell him the story, and I go step by step what had happened. And I guess he must have believed me, because he said, I took him over to the window. I said, look, Dad, you can still see where the curtains, I had grabbed onto the curtains. I go, they're all crunched still. And I said, right there, look out the window. I said, you can see right there, something was in that snow, right there. I said, Dad, we were face to face. I said, I swear I'm telling the truth, because at the same time, my brother was like, shut up, she's lying. So anyway, my dad goes, stay here, I'm going to go outside. And so I go outside, and he says, I'm going to measure how tall it was. So that's how he said this. He came back in and he's like, that thing had to be about 7.5 feet tall. I was like, I told you, Dad. And so that's when he goes, well, get dressed and let's go outside. So we get dressed, we go outside, and I'm expecting to see like left, right footprints. And all there was these giant holes in the ground about 6 feet apart. And I was like, wow, they were like in line right in front of each other. And the reason there was no like footprints, my dad's like, well, it's still been snowing. The snow has filled in the holes. And so my dad walked there's a big tree right there on the corner. So that's where I stopped. I wouldn't leave the yard. So my dad, you could see people had been driving on the road, but he went across the street. I don't know what made him think of it, but he went across the street and he found those same holes all the way to that creek. And so he was down there for a while, and he walked to the left and to the right, and then he came back. And I said, what'd you see? He goes, I think that thing came out of the creek, or it went back into the creek. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, my God, because still at the time, I don't know what a Bigfoot is. I don't know, are they a real live creature? Is this part of, can they be like a ghost and just come into your house? So I'm a 14-year-old kid still trying to process. All I know, it was eye to eye with me. It was red eyes. It was staring at me. So after that, I spent the rest of the day moving. Like Dad went to bed because he worked night shift. And my brother took off sled riding, telling all his friends. I tried to scare him, saying I saw Bigfoot. And they kind of all laughed it off. And I stayed in the house, and I moved my furniture in front of that window. And for me to give up a snow day, I'm like, I'm not lying. I'm not lying, you little, freak. I said, I'm staying in the house. I would never give up a snow day. And so I stayed in the house and quietly in the living room moved furniture around because I didn't want to wake Dad up. But my bedroom, I could move things around. So I went around to the back house because there was a back bedroom, and I was like thinking of everything to secure that place because I knew there was a monster out there, and what the heck was it doing in town, in my yard. So I thought, hey, maybe it's because those kids are always wandering and, running wild through the night. Maybe, it's stalking us or something. These are the things I was thinking. So, I didn't even for 6 months, when it hit dark, and it was wintertime, how it gets dark around 5. As soon as it hit dark, I was in that house. Even my little sisters, I'm like, you're not going out, you're staying in. And even my brother, I couldn't control my brother because he would always say even to this day, he's like, you did not. Because he thinks I'm going to turn 100 one day and finally leave him a note and say, sucker. But, I keep telling him, I swear to you, everything I've ever pulled on you, I said, this one was legit. And so about a year later, my grandfather from Sandy Hook, Kentucky came up. And my brother loved to humiliate me. So the first thing he ran and, first thing he's out of his mouth, hey, did you know Lynn saw Bigfoot? Bet she's lying. And so my grandfather, I took him out on those steps out there. And I said, Grandpa, I told him the whole story because by that time, you're a year older and you want to, you start wanting to get some feedback because there's no internet. I wanted to know what people thought. And you didn't want to talk to too many of your friends about it because you didn't want to be labeled as the town Bigfoot nut. And, and I forgot, I left this part out. Later that day, before I started moving furniture around, my friend came back over to the house. And it was early afternoon. And she goes, I want you to know my mom slapped me. And she told me I could never hang out with you anymore. And I go, well, what are you doing here then? And she says, she apologized to me. And I came over to tell you this. She says, when Mom went to work, she says it was on the Vandalia radio that a Bigfoot, that 2 men down at the Kaskaskia River saw a Bigfoot running as fast as it could down the banks. And that's when I was like, oh, my God. It came up from the river, and, it came up through the creek. Because that creek, we knew where that creek went. You can follow that creek. It goes under the the Kennedy Boulevard there, and then back in there it goes out to the Kaskaskia River. Like I said, there's not a spot in that town us kids haven't played in because you have friends all over town. We had moved several times. I have cousins all over town. We even knew where the caves were over in that area. Now, we weren't allowed to play at the Kaskaskia River because my dad's brother, years ago when he was 16, drowned in the Kaskaskia River. So my dad would always say, if I ever catch you kids, because he knew we ran wild all over town, he said, if I ever catch you kids near that river, he says, you'll get the belt. Even though he said that, we still went there, but we didn't get in the water. And we'd get on the railroad tracks. Kids are kids. So anyway, so my grandfather, back to my grandfather's story, we're sitting there on the porch. And I said, Grandpa, I said, do you believe me? He says, well, I don't know what you saw. He says, but I can tell you what happened. He says, my great-grandfather moved to Morgan. He goes, where he's from, that area, Morgan County, Kentucky, in 1844. And he goes, my grandfather, Simon, he says, was a big storyteller. And he said, we didn't have TVs and not radios. They didn't have TVs and radios back then. So it was always the storytellers people would come around to listen to. And he said, his grandpa Simon, he said, would tell the story, what happened to the settlers when they first came into that area in eastern Kentucky. And he said, when they were more and more were moving in, they said there was these crazy, wild, tall men that lived up in the caves that had no clothes on, and sometimes they would run around in the middle of the night screaming. And he said it was a god-awful scream. He said they would come down and steal, livestock, and then when it got to the point, he said he thinks the more the people moved in, the more curious those wild men were coming from the caves and the hills down into, their properties. The women reported that, they thought they were trying to be kidnapped, or the kids claimed they were almost grabbed. So he said the men would get together with guns and go hunt them, try to hunt them down. So they could never find them, and they'd even hire trackers. So part of the story was, to warn them and let everybody know, don't go up in there. And he says, but he goes, when my grandfather was born in 1910, he says, by then nobody went out for fun to hike. He said, if we went out, it was to hunt. And he says, I never ran into one, but you would still hear, the stories. And back then, they just called them the crazy, wild, hairy men. And I says, well, now they call them Bigfoot. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I've heard of the Bigfoot. And he goes, if that's the same thing, he goes, that was quite, an ordeal you went through. And I said, well, Gramps, I said, they didn't even know about mountain gorillas until 1902. I said, they would call all those people crazy if they even said, hey, there's these mountain gorillas. And, and then eventually it went from crazy to being, oh, yeah, they're part of this type of the family, and they finally got recognized. So I told him, I said, I don't know. I still, I told him how I was still scared. I said, I'm still scared to go places. I said, Grandpa, I can't even walk on sidewalks. I said, when I go places, if I'm alone, I walk in the middle of the road. I said, because if you go by houses and sidewalks, they have bushes, they have corners around the house. And I know this thing exists, and it comes into town. I said, I've had a lot of time to think about this. I said, I think this is something they do all the time. I said, I think if you live by rivers, ponds, or creeks, they're curious animals. They have probably been all over the United States, back and forth several times, and they probably come up into towns. So I told myself for the longest time, I thought he was, it was stalking, kids. I said, it still could have been. I don't even know what it was looking for. And in the snow, I said, but I do now believe I will not.
Uh-oh, I think we lost her. Let me see if I can call her back, fellas.
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened there, but...
one of the questions I was going to ask her is that her dad seemed to have known what these creatures are. I just wonder if he had a previous experience with them.
It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah. Because he seemed to know, like what she was saying is that he seemed to know immediately what she was talking about. So it just kind of makes me wonder if he had even heard things previously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get her back on.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm gonna reset my Skype. I got a real bad echo.
Okay, I'm going to try to get her back here. Sorry folks, sometimes we get dropped calls, so... Okay, I don't know why it's not going on, Brian. Let me try one more time.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, she was coming through clear, but...
Yeah, there was a little bit of background noise, but sometimes we can't always control that with a
Skype
phone call and Skype. Yeah.
Yeah.
I may have to pause this a second and try to call her back. Let me see if she's messaged me. Okay, I'm going to pause this just a moment. Okay, everyone, we had a little glitch there with the recording, so as you're listening, there's probably a little hiccup there, but we're back rolling again. So, Lynn, if you remember where you stopped, let's go ahead and resume. It's a very fascinating encounter.
Okay, I don't even know where I lost you, but if he said in the middle of the road, well, so I told my grandfather, I says, I no longer walk on sidewalks because, it's too close to houses, it's too close to bushes, and you never know what's around the corner of every house. Seeing that thing deeply changed my life. I went from just being this carefree kid to I'm on guard. I'm very much aware of my neighborhood. Everything. I stared at every tree. Is that a monster? Is that a tree? No longer did I go down alleys, and it was burned into my brain forever. And it's been 44 years, and I can tell you, it's like a movie in my head. I know I can't, it's just there until the day I die. But I don't know if I told you about my grandfather. I asked him what he thought about it, and if he'd ever heard of anything like that. And that's when he went on to tell me about his great-grandfather moving to Kentucky in 1844. And during that time, the settlers there, had encounters with wild men who had lived up in the caves and hunted, I guess, in that area. And he said Kentucky was known for its happy hunting ground, and that's where the Indians came to hunt. And I guess even during, even 100 years before, it was, tons of buffalo were even still there. But anyway, the settlers were having trouble with the hairy giant wild men that would come and steal their wildlife. And then when it finally got to the point where it was scaring the women and children, and they thought they were, it was attempting to abduct them, that's when the men got together and took off with guns to try to find this thing and kill it. Or they thought it was a person. And so they could never find it, and they even hired a trackers, and they couldn't find it. So he said his family that in that area, that's what they called this thing. And they just assumed it was a human. And then I, told him, I said, well, I said they didn't until 1902 discover mountain gorillas. So that makes sense to me that up until then, they don't have anything to compare it to. So of course, if you see a Bigfoot, it just looks like a giant muscle guy. I guess from a distance, you would think that's a human. And, but when you see it up front, up close, like I did, just a few feet away from me, people have asked me, they're like, what did it look like? Was it a man or was it an ape? Or a gorilla or whatever. I'm like, well, I can tell you, I can explain it like this. I said, if you've ever seen the movie Jeepers Creepers, the monster in that movie, I said, if you saw that monster and someone asked you, hey, is that a man or an ape? You wouldn't say, hey, that looks just like a man or it looks just like an ape, because it has its own unique, facial characteristics and stuff. They're all unique to themselves. I said, its mouth. I said, I've looked at every picture I can on the internet. I said, there's been a few that's close. I'm sure they're all different and people see them different. And I said, but the one I saw, it did not have a protruding, lip like a monkey's mouth. I said, that mouth looked totally human. The cheeks looked totally human. The eyes, I said, other than being, if you're a kid and you tell them to draw a picture of a monster, they're going to have red eyes. The thing I saw had red eyes. I said, I don't know if that's from when the light, it stood up and it was reflecting off its eyes and, and it just gave off that red glow. I don't know. I says, but its face looked half human and half kind of ape-like. So I told my dad, I said, I kept calling it, it was the ape head with the human body. But I said, but Dad, there's something wrong with its arms. I said, everything else, it didn't like terrify me as much as the shoulders and that arm. I said, the arms looked kind of deformed. They were so long, they hung way past his knees. And the hands were like, I said, even a dinner plate would be too small for, how big those hands are. It's huge. I says, I can understand. This is why I wouldn't walk near houses or bushes, because this thing could stay in a tree line and just reach out and grab you. So humongous, in a second, you'd be gone. So I used to just sit and think about this thing all the time, because everyone would laugh about it and joke about it. And I'm like, hey, I've seen something that's real, and it came to town. I mean, I didn't even leave my house, and us kids were known for, you could never find us until we came home at night. And I was just never afraid of anything. And here I am in my own house, and a monster comes to my house. So, it changed my life.
So Lynn, let me kind of interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but
That's okay.
So did you look at this creature in the eyes?
Yes, we stared. Yes, I don't know how many seconds went by, but when it stood up and we were face to face, eye to eye, and after I had kept looking down at its arms, I was in total shock by the size of it. Then at last, when it made that snarl with its face, that's when I locked. The only thing I was staring at that time was eye to eye. And yes, we stayed eye to eye contact until it made that movement with its leg. And that's when I finally broke free from looking at its eyes, and I saw it raise that leg, and I was able to just book it.
Hey, Lynn.
But yeah.
Quick question on those eyes. You said they're red. Were they kind of like an eye shine? You know what I'm talking about? When headlights, were they reflective? I guess that's what I was trying to figure out. Or were they just...
Yeah. Well, as far as I can remember, it was kind of like a reddish glow, like a reddish tint. But I would never say, hey, it had brown eyes, blue eyes, black eyes. It was red. So, and I don't even remember the black pupil. I just remember red. And I'm staring. I don't remember like blood vessels or anything. It is just red eyes. And the way it was squinting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It probably, I guess the other question I have was, it didn't have the whites. I can't remember what we call it, but the whites of the eyes that humans have.
No. Oh no. It was all red.
Okay. And again, I'm just going to kind of dig a little bit deeper on the details. They're reddish, like a reflective, or
well, I guess you could say reflective, because I kept remembering thinking, I bet the light, my bedroom light, because the light that went on was the ceiling light. I think that could have it could have been a reflective. I just remember all red.
And that's
and it wasn't like it.
That's typically what it is. The
and it wasn't like a candy apple red. It was like if you're driving and you see an animal and they have red eyes, like a deer or something. Because every time I see that, I always have a flashback. I'm driving. I'm like, wow, that animal had a red eye. And or you see yellow eyes or whatever.
Lynn, one question I have too, because when you said that you saw them face to face, eye to eye, did you get the sense that that creature was eye to eye trying to maybe kill you, or was it just curious?
I was thinking it was calculating really quick. Like it was getting, like its face just kind of, how like a dog would stare at you and then the dog's like ready to pounce on you, and he gets that kind of growl, because that's what his face did. It went to like a growl, and I just thought, it's going to kill me. It's coming. I at all times thought it was going to kill me. It just had this, before it did that growl, it just had this death stare at me. I guess maybe it was expecting me to just turn and run. I couldn't. I would have loved to. I couldn't run. So the only thing I was just holding on to those curtains, crunching them in my hands, and I could not move. I'm a kid,
Right.
And, today I'm sure I'd take off.
Yeah, 14 years old, right? At the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's too bad. Kathy, your friend, she never came to look at, so you didn't have another person to look at it.
When we were in the closet, I said to her, I go, Kathy, you're the really brave one of all of us, because there was like 5 of us that hung out all the time. I go, you're the brave one, you're the strong one. I go, why didn't you look? And I'm pleading with her in the closet. And she just kept shaking her head, and she goes, I was so scared. And she goes, and you were crying and shaking. She goes, and what you were saying, because I was describing a monster. So I thought over the years, would I have looked? I don't know.
Do you?
I kept thinking. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just wonder if you stay in contact with her.
No, that was 44 years ago. We moved from Vandalia like 2 years after that to Altamont, and she did go to my wedding, and we just kind of lost track. I don't even know where she is today, who she's married to, but Bigfoot wasn't, and that was another thing. Years later, probably in our mid-20s, she did come to visit us, because we lived at that time I was married, and we lived in near Peru, Indiana. There was a Griffith Air Force Base, and she come to visit, and she brought it up, because it's just like you just stop talking about that thing. Life goes on, and she goes, do you remember seeing Bigfoot? And I'm like, yeah. And I go, do you think about it? She goes, sometimes. I go, yeah, me too. I go, and then we just kind of went on. So it was so terrifying, because you just have to move on, or else you can't function.
Yeah.
Hey, Lynn, I was going to ask, because I know that you were only 14 and this was like 1975, but had you had any experiences since then? Or
no.
Encounters, or no?
No. So, but I'm still very much aware of my environment. So I'm very protective. I don't drive down back roads at nighttime. It's just different how I viewed my life, because I was like, I don't ever want to go through that again. Yeah, I said, if I ever find out I have heart damage, it'll be from when I was 14 years old and saw a Bigfoot. I said, because I can't believe I didn't have a heart attack at 14.
And Will, this is very, very common for a lot of people, because they don't want to go through that experience again. And isn't that true for Will?
Oh yeah, it completely changes your outlook about your whole life and your surroundings and every situation you're in. And there's things that, like you said, Lynn, you drive down certain areas and you'll see something and it'll trigger those memories, and it really does. It brings it right back to where you were, no matter how many years ago it was.
Yeah. And I'll get on Google Maps every now and then and go look at my old address, and that's the first thing I remember, And I'm like,
and we hear this all the time too with Native Americans. Same thing. They had a bad experience at a young age, and they don't want to ever do that again.
Yeah. Because, you're raised, especially us kids. We might have had an unusual upbringing, with a parent always gone at night, and we basically get up in the morning, eat cereal for breakfast, watch Saturday morning cartoons, and for the rest of the time, we were never home. Like I said, the whole town, we spent more time in the woods and the parks. And then to come across a monster, that wasn't even on your radar, when you're playing. We might have played, hey, vampires, or we heard about werewolves, but that was it, And I can remember after I saw Bigfoot, thinking back, I was like, I remember, it was years ago hearing about Momo Monster, and that was, the Missouri Monster. But there was nothing to, and people back then, it was just a different world, and I wanted to get back. It took me, a long time to go back out and start hanging out.
That's a good point, because I remember, back in those days, 74 was when I had my first encounter, and we saw tracks 2 years before that. So there wasn't a lot of information out in those times.
No.
Yeah.
No internet, no books. And us kids, I'm never in watching TV. It wasn't until years later in my 20s, I think, In Search Of came on, and they had this Bigfoot. They started showing Bigfoot. Boy, I would be glued to the TV watching this, listening to people's stories, comparing, did they see what I saw? It would comfort me when someone would say, hey, I saw this thing. I'd be like, thank God, someone else saw it, because then all of a sudden you're back to being normal and you can go on.
Right. Hey, Lynn, I wanted to ask you real quick, because you mentioned that you told your experience to your dad, and he kind of understood. So I'm just kind of wondering, did he ever have an experience himself before that?
Nope. My dad grew up in that town, and I asked him, I go, Dad, have you ever seen a monster or anything? He goes, no, I went to see the movie The Monster at the theater called The Thing, and he said that day we as kids with BB guns had shot out light poles, and he goes, we had to run home in the dark, and he goes, I'd never been so scared in my life. I go, well, that's how scared I was, Dad, but this thing was right out our house. And I would even beg him, I go, let's move. And he's like, I'd always say, can we move? So
but
it was scary.
Did he believe you, though? I mean, did he believe you?
Well,
what you told him?
When he first poked his head in the closet, he seemed a little irritated at me because, I was always picking on my brother, and my brother we went back and forth. I mean, we were very close, but, it was always game on with my brother. It was like, who could torment each other the best? So I think my dad was like, he was tired. He'd been working all night. And here I am hiding in a closet, and my brother's, telling on me, saying, she's in there trying to scare me, and, get her, Dad. So, when he comes in, he's like, what are you doing in the closet? And that's when I immediately, because I'm still sitting down, covered up I was pulling, clothes off the hangers and coats, and I'm covering up, hiding. Why I thought I could hide? I'm a kid, I don't know. I thought, you can't see me, I'm invisible. So I had everything pulled over top of me, and when he said that, I stood up, and I instantly had a flood of tears coming out. I'm like, Dad, I swear to God, on a stack of Bibles, I'm not lying. I'm not, picking on him. This happened. So then as I took him over and showed him, I think he saw the crunched curtains.
He saw
and
the
then
prints. Yeah,
our drapes, from me squeezing them so tight.
Mm-hmm.
He noticed that. And then I said, look out the window, Dad. I go, look. I go, see, you can see there was something in the snow. So, I'm showing him proof one after another. And then I think he slowly started to believe me. He didn't know what to think of it, but, he slowly started to believe me. But he did. He warned us. He says, be in before dark. You kids get in the house before it's dark, and don't play at the creek anymore. And so that's what he said. And, he just moved on.
And actually, your story is kind of similar to Will's when they found the prints in the snow, right, Will? I mean, because didn't you go to your friend's house and he kind of told you exactly what was happening?
Yeah, we found those prints. We went to John's house, and his dad, when he went back out there, kind of explained what little he knew of what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn, the other interesting aspect of your story that I find really fascinating is that the news media reported the gentleman who, they said two different guys had reported this. I don't know that would be done today if the news media picked up on that.
See, and that was what saved my life right there. It was the best, to me, that was the best part of seeing Bigfoot. Because my friend, we had been friends since we were like 5 or 6. And for her mom, we begged her mom that morning, please let her spend the night. And she's like, no, I can't. She was, I'm the only one that's, going to be there at work. I have to be there. And, Kathy needs to be here to watch because she had a handicapped brother. Okay. And so we were like, don't worry, no problem. And that's why we set that alarm. We even joked and said, maybe we should set 2 alarms. So, she was not going to be late for anything. So for Kathy to be slapped by her mother was angry, told her she could never hang out with me again. And then for Kathy to come over and say, my mom came home and apologized. It was on the radio that 2 men at 5:30 in the morning at the river of the Kaskasky River saw a Bigfoot booking it down the banks. And I was like, Kathy, I said, that makes sense. My dad saw tracks that went to the creek, and that creek goes under Kennedy Boulevard to the river. I said it came from the river because from that point, I didn't know where it came from. I had no clue. I just knew it went into the creek. And so I was like, oh my God, it was such a blessing that 2 men, these were adults now, it wasn't just a kid. So when my dad got up, when he woke up, I go, hey, Dad, it was on the radio. 2 men at the river saw this thing at 5:30. I said, that means, from when we set the alarm, I got dressed, however long that experience lasted, it booked it to the creek and took off running, back down to the river and then ran on the banks. I go, the timing's perfect. I said, see? So that was such a comfort. Everything just kind of like put it to peace for me at a point, if it could be at peace. At least if Kathy didn't look out and see that thing, at least there was proof, there was 2 adults. So at one point she was like, hey, let's call the radio station and you can talk to those 2 men. And then I'm like, okay. And then she's like, no way. She goes, then everyone's going to know in school, because we were freshmen in high school, just everyone's going to know we're the Bigfoot freaks. And I'm like, okay. Because she was kind of like the tough leader of the group, And so I was like, okay, we're not going to do that. But I always thought, boy, I'd like to know, I don't know who those 2 men were as I got older. But I just didn't want to bring it up because, you want to be popular. You don't want to be made fun of.
What's interesting about your story is so many of the facts are, they corroborate what everybody else has said. Many other accounts. The fact that it was down by the creek, and you're right. It would have been interesting if you could have talked to those 2 men and got some additional information from them.
Yeah, and I thought back, I go, well, everybody was making fun of the Bigfoot story by then, so probably they made fun of those 2 men. To me, I was like, well, if they're making fun of them, they're not making fun of me, So, and I kind of learned it was a joke, and it kind of irritated me because I'm like, gosh, why don't they take this serious?
Well, what you saw.
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
imagine how many of them there are now.
Right. Hey, Lynn, what did your mother think at the time?
My mother, they were divorced and she lived in Texas.
Oh, okay.
That's why we ran wild in that town. So usually one of us kids kind of knew where the other one was. But, we were basically brats. That's why we got our phone disconnected, and we were always in trouble.
Now, did you think that? Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question about the location. Was it like a kind of a rural suburban area, or a suburban area near a city? I don't know much about the area.
Vandalia had a population of about 5,000 people at the time. And where I lived was mostly elderly people up and down 5th Street. And if you ever get a chance, you look across, there's on 5th Street, there's 5th Street, and then the creek behind the houses that leads out across Kennedy Boulevard. So nobody's really, it's not that populated to where people are up, early in the morning. It's a small town. So.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to get a sense of if there's some wooded areas or wilderness around. It sounds like it is.
Wooded areas, yeah. There were pockets of woods throughout the town, and we played in all of them. We had clubhouses and underground. We even knew where the caves were.
Now, Lynn, let me just ask you: were there like a swamp area? Was there a swamp area or a water like pond in that area?
No, just the creek, and it was a deep gully in some spots. And as you got closer to the Kennedy Boulevard, it would get wider, and then it would, if you headed toward in town, it was more narrow and less water. But if you headed toward the river, it would be a little deeper. Out by the river, if it rained a lot, it would flood inland, and then I guess you would call that kind of swampy. But no, nothing really.
Yeah, but there was definitely a water source there for.
Yeah, it definitely came from the Kaskaskia River there.
Mm-hmm. Hey, now I wanted to ask you just. I know we're kind of running short on time here, but I just wanted to ask you, because I know that you saw that creature outside the window, and then it stood up, and you saw face to face. Did you get the impression that there may have been more of those creatures in that area, like around your house, or no?
No. Nope. At that time, we just saw Now, when my dad went out, there's a little tree to the left of the house. Well, it's bigger now. But that little tree, we saw the giant holes coming in an angle to the house. And then this is what my dad figured out. And leaving the house, it went straight through, in front of the house, crossed the street, and went, across the street into that creek. So he thinks, we just believed it was one, and it came in one. It could have been behind other people's houses.
Okay.
So
okay.
Do you have any idea what I was looking for under your window, like food?
No, that drives me crazy. Because who knows what was out there? With us kids throwing things, we always left toys out there. But when I went out there was nothing there. I mean, but it was moving its hand like it was almost petting the snow so gently, both hands moving outward from whatever it was in the center. And it did that maybe 2 or 3 times, and then it just dead stopped. And then when it dead stopped, that's when it tilted its head a little bit. And as it tilted its head, it slowly rose. And that's when, my God, this thing is a monster. And it was, oh my God. I cannot believe what I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's got to be terrifying. Do you think it could have seen in the window while it was...
No. The reason I said heavy drapes, because those were the type of drapes back in the 70s. You couldn't see it. It had the drapes, and then it had like the sheer behind it, and they were heavy drapes. And my grandmother put them up because, it insulated the house, and the way us kids would run in and out, we always had like heavy drapes and stuff. I don't think there's any way. And they were big too. I don't think there's any way it could have seen any light on in that house until I opened, and at first when I opened the curtains, I only opened them maybe 4 or 5 inches. And then as I'm looking in the hands and I'm watching what it's doing, I'm opening the curtains wider and I'm grabbing on them really tight. I could have pulled them down. I was hanging on to them so tight. And that's when, that's when it just looked up. That's why I don't think it heard us talking. I think, it was the light. It was like, oh, I'm busted, So, but I believe it was, huh?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I believe when it saw my mouth moving, if it didn't hear me talking, or, I never tested that out. It thought it had a short, limited time it needed to go. And I've always often thought, if it had just turned and never stood up and just like ran like a bear or something, I would have just said, hey, that was a big bear. You know what I mean? That would have been the end of the story. But this thing stood up and confronted me with a dead stare. And it was like, who's going to blink first?
Yeah. Because one thing I mean, the name is Bigfoot. Hear about their footprints and everything, but I wanted to ask you, how big was its hand?
Bigger than a dinner plate is what I remember. Each hand was bigger than a dinner plate.
Wow.
So huge. Because that's why I was like, this is, I was like freaking out when I saw the hand. First, I'm expecting to see, paws. And then when I saw the hands, and then when I saw how huge they were, that's when the alarm went off.
So in other words, it wasn't like paws. It was actually hands.
These were fingers. It had a thumb and it had 4 fingers. I watched it slowly, delicately, gently moving that snow. And I wasn't even concerned what's it looking for. I didn't see anything. I'm looking at those hands. And all of a sudden I'm realizing, you know what? Those are knees. He's squatting. This thing is squatting down. And at that time, its head was still looking, what it was focused in on what it was doing. And that's when it just stopped. And when it stopped, its hands just froze. And it's not like it moved its hands back. The hands froze what they were doing. And simultaneously, it looked up and everything just rose like a slow motion movie. It's in my mind forever.
It was busted. I think it must have seen the light or something. And what motivated you or what prompted you was you said you saw something like a dark shadow or something behind the curtains?
No. No dark. I never saw no dark shadow or anything. I saw when I looked out the window, it was a huge black animal. I thought it was a bear. See, when it snowed, it was so light outside, you could see it. It wasn't like, you're looking out at dark time trying to focus in on a bush or anything. It snowed and it was bright out, very bright. So I instantly thought it was a bear because you could see it had hair. I wasn't even thinking fur or anything. I just saw it was huge and round. And then all of a sudden I saw those hands come out and start moving that snow. And then that's when, total fear started to set in, and that's how it began.
Yeah. So it was, the curtains must have been open, partially open or something. In other words, you could see, you didn't have to open the curtains to see what was out there.
Well, I opened them about 3 or 4 inches at first, and then I opened them wider. Because I was like, I was holding them so tight. And, I had those open probably about 13 inches the whole time. Because as it stood up, I'm looking, I want to see its whole body. It was just natural for me to move the curtains because you're like, how big is this? I'm just looking at this monster. And I kept saying, oh my God. I'm, crying. And I'm like, it's a monster. It's staring at me. It's red eyes. I said, its shoulders are huge. I said, its arms are hanging down past its knees. I said, we're going to die. And,
Hey, Lynn, so let me ask you about that. So you saw the creature and its arms were hanging beneath its knees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was obviously very shocking to you because you never saw that before.
No, there was nothing even, there's nothing I've even heard about with arms. See, that's why I thought it was like deformed. I even told, my dad and my grandpa, there was something wrong with this thing's arms. I said, because its arms were really long, hung past his knees, and his hands, I couldn't see his feet, but I bet you they were close to his ankles. That's why I wouldn't walk near houses, because I assumed those things can just reach out, probably a good 6 or 7 foot stretch, and just grab you. Because that's what kept me from walking in, and it kept me in the streets walking. I wouldn't even go near trees. I would zigzag through the road. If there was a tree close to the road, I'm going to the other side. So at what point did you get the nerve to talk to your siblings and tell them, hey, I know what I saw, and I don't know if you guys saw what I saw, but I know that I saw what I saw. And and did you get the courage to tell them, I guess? Oh, yeah. As soon as my little sisters came home that day, I'm like, look, you're never going outside after dark again. You're staying in. There's monsters out there. I had them scared to death. Now, my brother would always, he would say, she's lying. And I'd be like, shut up. I'd be like, I'm not lying. I said, I was just like, how brother and sisters would go back and forth.
Yeah.
And I was just like maybe a year and a half older than him. So I'm 14 and, he's like 12, in February he would have, turned 13, then I would have turned 15. But, and I was still taller than him and I was going to pounce him, So, but, it was always game on. I mean, I can understand my brother because, in that room, in my dad's bedroom, for fun, okay? I didn't even have friends around. If I would tell him, hey, go up in the attic and get this, and then I would lock him in there and tell him there's a ghost up there. And he'd be in tears and coming out of that closet swinging at me. And I would start laughing. And then next it was his turn. He would put like maybe pantyhose over his head and, jump out of a closet. It was always back and forth. So when I did, hey, there's a monster with red eyes, he's like, shut up. You know what I mean? And even to this day, throughout the years, I'd always say to him, Troy, I'm not lying. Now, my sisters, I'm the oldest. They believed me. And I would always say to them, listen, you guys, I don't care. I said, I'm telling the truth on this one. I said, listen, these things exist. And I said, they'll kill you. I go, there's a bad one. It's going to kill you. So I said, stay out of the woods. And I only have one sister who will hike in woods, but she says she always gets that creep. She'll get a sense of creepiness, and so she usually turns around. But I scared them, I meant to scare them. I wanted them to be scared. And I would draw pictures. I'm not an artist or anything, but I would make the outline of what it looked like and give it red eyes. I'd be like, there, this is what it looked like. I'd be like, don't leave this yard. And so...
Everyone, let me break in a moment. We're running pretty short on time, but I got one question real quick. And you probably said this. I don't remember at the moment. There's so much I've been kind of listening to here. What made you go to the window and open it in the first place, the curtains?
Because the night before, we knew it was going to snow. And for a kid, that was like $1 million on a Saturday.
Oh, right.
So the forecast said snow, and I'm like, awesome, we're going sled riding.
So you just took a peek out to see if it was snowing yet?
Oh, yeah. And plus, I had to go out that side door and walk in the alley. So do I need to put my tennis shoes on, or do I wear my boots?
Gotcha. Tom,
so,
Brian?
Yeah, that's the only reason I went to that window, and that's what scares me.
Sure.
Because if I hadn't gone to that window, I think I wouldn't be here today.
Tom, Brian, any final questions before we close out here?
No, I just want to say thank you, Lynn, for coming on. I mean, fascinating account and everything. So yeah, just thank you for coming on.
You're welcome. I wish more people would take the time, I'm sure, and just, explain what's going on. It needs to quit being a topic of a joke and get back to how our ancestors believed this was a serious matter, and start teaching people to be aware. I mean, they can still go in national parks, but you need to be aware.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Tom, anything final?
Yeah, I agree entirely. You have a riveting story and great details. Good story. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Lynn, we certainly appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open.